Peace and blessings. Welcome back to the channel once again, where we talk all things health and healing from a holistic perspective. And today will be no different. Today, I'm going to give you a holistic roadmap to approaching breast cancer. Now, the reason why this is so important right now in this space and time is because it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And also why it's so important is because we all have a mother, a wife, a sister, a aunt, a best friend, a good friend out there who unfortunately will come into contact with this at some point. Breast cancer is on the rise in so many different ways, and specifically in the African American woman population, the mortality rate is 40%, okay? That's a very high mortality rate. And the conversation that most people aren't having around cancer is that there's an actual high reoccurrence rate as well too. I think somewhere between 10 and 30% of people have a reoccurring issue. And I always tell people this because at the end of the day, when we initially get diagnosed with anything, and specifically women who get diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, the first thoughts are, what did I do? What did I do to deserve this? You start thinking about all the bad habits that you have. And I think it's really important to understand that, when you get that diagnosis, that is not when the cancer began, okay? As a matter of fact, for cells to become abnormal, not even cancerous, just to become abnormal, that's a 20-year period. And within that 20-year period, those abnormal cells can take 10 to 15 years before they become cancerous. So it's really important we know and understand that this is something that happens over the course of sometimes people half of their lifetime. Okay, so that means that this is a lifestyle issue. This isn't something that happened right there. Now, there are things that can happen within a 6-month period, like losing, a parental figure, losing a loved one, that could trigger so much stress in the body that it then pushes you over the mountain. But it's important to know and understand that every day, if we were to take a blood sample from everybody, at some point in your lifetime, you have had cancer, okay? Now, the reason why it didn't form into cancer, that cancerous cell didn't become cancerous, is because our bodies are designed to not only survive, but to thrive. So it's designed to stomp out cancer. You understand? So that's why cancer takes so long to develop in the body, because the body is constantly making sure, checks and balances, that, okay, it's a cancerous cell here, let's go in, let's fight it, let's remove it from the body, okay? But what happens over time, unfortunately, is that all of those systems become depleted. They become deficient, and they become not accurate or proficient in doing their job. And that is what leads the way to cancer, which we'll talk about in just a second. So really important to know and understand that when somebody is diagnosed with breast cancer, it's important you know and understand that much of that has developed as a result of 10 to 15 years, okay? Now, the question that I often get from people is, what about small children who get cancer? They didn't have, sometimes they're getting cancer and they're like 8, 9 years old. They didn't even have the 10 years to get the cancer to grow in the body that way. Well, the unfortunate thing, and we'll talk about this just in a second, is that the first thing we pass down to our children are our genes, okay? The second thing we pass down to our children are our habits, our eating habits, our stress, so forth and so on. Okay, so if you're born into, literally, with the genetics of someone who has been cooking up cancer in their body, and then you pass on those habits to them in the first 4 to 5 years of life, then that is essentially a breeding ground for cancer, okay? And then sometimes it's environmental factors that we don't take into account. But when you're looking at the overall arching picture, the vast majority of individuals who get cancer is developing over the course of 10 to 15 years, okay? 20 years in some case, okay? So if you're 40 years old, that cancer might have started when you were 19 years old, okay? Really, really important. And we'll get into some of those factors that contribute to that. Now, one of the things that is quite often mentioned in oncology, which is the study of cancer, okay, is the doubling time. And the doubling time is the number of days it takes for a tumor to double in size, okay? Now, when you're thinking about the doubling time, it can range from anywhere from 44 days to 1,800 days. Okay, I'm gonna repeat that. The doubling time, the time or number of days it takes for a tumor to double in size can be from anywhere from 44 days to 1,800 days. Okay, now here's why this is important. The shorter your doubling time, it means the cancer is more aggressive and develops faster. Okay, so those are the more dangerous times. Okay, dangerous doubling times. All right. Now, here's the other thing that's really, really important. When you think about cancer, for it to be seen with the visible eye, okay, or detected, let's say during a mammogram, etc., again, it takes about 15 years to get to that size where it's actually detectable. So what that means is that you've had cancer, but the unfortunate thing is it was A, undetectable, okay? And then B, the other thing is that your body has been fighting against it, okay? In many regards, all right? The other thing that is I wanna mention is that now there are new tests. And I think it's really important to have these new tests because things like the mammogram have come under a lot of scrutiny because mammograms have been associated with possibly causing metastasis of cancer. When a woman puts her breast on that plate and then they essentially smash down the breast, they could essentially cause that tumor to leak, okay, and possibly metastasize. So there's been some back and forth as to whether or not that's happening or not happening. And I think the biggest concern was that that is the primary tool that they're using to determine, breast cancer. And so as a result of that, it's one of the primary tools or checkups that people are getting. And nothing has replaced that at this time. I think this is the reason why we're still on the edge about it. But it is something called thermography that is useful as well too. But again, that's probably for another video. And then they also do now what are called liquid biopsies. And the liquid biopsies can detect cancers 10 years prior to them actually becoming fully cancerous. Okay, so those are just some tests out there for people who are probably in that pool of people who are at high risk that you may want to look into. All right. Now, the other thing that I think is really important to mention is this. Cancerous cells grow by doubling or multiplying the cells, very much like a virus. Okay, so it starts with one cell, one rogue cell. All right, now I want you to think about this for just a second. Look at our bodies. It's made of trillions of cells, okay? Trillions of cells. Now, I said trillions. Let me put in perspective how big trillions are, okay? If we were to compare a million to a billion, okay? If we were to add up like 1,000,000 seconds, it would total to like 11,000 days. If we were to add up 1 billion seconds, it would be like 32 years, okay? It's really important to understand there's a huge difference between 1,000,000 and 1 billion, and you can imagine the difference between 1 billion and 1 trillion, okay? And so we are made of trillions of cells, 75 trillion cells. And it only takes one cell to go rogue. I mean, just imagine you have this world, all right? And then you have one individual that decides, I hate people. And it starts to figure out, how can I ostracize myself from all people, okay? At the expense of all people. So that's one cell deciding, I'm going to do what I want to do. Now, here's why this is so important, because you got, a bicep muscle is very different from the muscle in a heart, even though it's muscle. You got the tissue that makes an ab is very different from the tissue that makes a calf muscle. okay, are very different from the tissue in the thyroid versus the tissue in the spleen. They all have different functions, but they're still the same type of tissue, all right? But within one tissue, you have one cell that decides that I no longer want to be a liver cell anymore. I no longer want to do what a breast tissue does. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to create my own world. And that's essentially what a cancerous cell is, okay? It goes rogue. That rogueness comes from a mutation, all right? So it's really important to know and understand that once these cells start doubling like a virus, because that's what a virus does, our virus will literally consume you if the defenses were completely down to the point where it kills you, and now the virus can't thrive anymore. Okay, it's the same thing with cancer in terms of how you look at it from a mental approach. All right, so it's really important to understand that because, again, before it becomes detectable, there are millions, if not billions, of cells that have multiplied and divided, and it started with 1 that went to 2, and 2 that went to 4, and 4 that went to 8, and so on and so forth. Okay, now let's get into how do we look at how cancer forms in the body. And to simplify this, I'm going to look at 3 areas. Okay. All right. I'm going to look at, well, really 2. Okay. But it's 3 because I'm looking at 2 different types of genes. Okay. And then I'm going to look at how the DNA or genes get damaged, because that's what causes the mutation. Okay. It's when the DNA becomes mutated, the genes become mutated, or certain genes are turned on and certain genes are turned off. That's when cancer forms. Okay. And so we're going to look at 2 genes, and we're going to look at how DNA either becomes damaged or we can repair it. Now, what's really important before we get into it, your DNA is what is inside of your cell. It's what makes you who you are. Okay. Your parents passed down their DNA to you. All right. Now, what's really important to understand is that your DNA is made of genes. Okay. You know how they say you got good genes. All right. So, but within those genes, it's important to understand that genetics are like light switches. They can be turned on and they can be turned off. Genetics, genes are like light switches. They can be turned on and they can be turned off. Okay. It's not this idea that you either have good genes or bad genes. Don't look at it that way. If you look at it that way, you're taking the same approach that modern medicine takes. They either think you have good genes and bad genes, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But the real thing, the real holistic approach to it is, no, you don't have good or bad genes. You have, what's happening is you're turning on genes that do a certain thing. You're turning on genes that turn on cancer. Or you're turning genes on that suppress cancer. Okay? That's the way to look at it. And I'm going to explain with genes how that works. So when it comes to cancer, we'll look at 2 specific genes. You have what's called tumor suppressor genes. Okay? Tumor suppressor genes. These genes suppress tumor activity. Okay, so when a cell becomes cancerous, the only way it could, evolve is to multiply and grow itself. But if the tumor suppressor genes are in effect, that won't happen because they suppress that cancerous activity. All right. Or on the other side, you have what are called oncogenes. Okay, oncogenes, oncology. Okay, because when you have your cancer doctor is an oncologist, but oncogenes actually increase cellular division. These are the genes that actually cause the tumor to grow. All right. Again, look at it from the standpoint. Genes are like light switches. They can be turned on and off. So in this case, you want the tumor suppressor genes to be turned on. Okay. And you want the oncogenes, the cancerous genes that tell the cancer to grow or proliferate, you want that to be turned off. Now, here's the thing. Quite often, from a patient standpoint, we're often told around breast cancer specifically that there are specific genes that if you have them, then they increase your risk for contracting breast cancer. So much so, we've been told that so much so, check this out. A couple of years ago, there was a famous actress who was told this very thing, that she had these specific genes that increase her risk for breast cancer. And guess what? As a preventative, she went and had her breast completely removed. She did not have cancer, okay? But because her doctor told her that she had these genes that put her at high risk, she cut had her breast completely removed, of course, at her doctor's recommendation. Now, here's what's important, and I think this is a very important, point to make. Just because you remove one tissue, it does not mean that you don't have the propensity to get another form of cancer. Cancer isn't something, when we see cancer, we think of it, okay, I have breast cancer. Okay, I have prostate cancer. I have colorectal cancer. I have thyroid cancer. I have pancreas cancer. We always think about it in a certain organ and a certain tissue, okay? The better way to think about cancer is that cancer is damage to DNA that could be in a specific tissue, but what's really important to understand is that what causes that cancer to grow actually has nothing to do with the tissue itself and more to do with those cancer growing genes being turned on and then switching the metabolism, going from cellular respiration to now fermentation, which means now I don't even need oxygen to grow, okay? So it's a completely different switch. So it's really important to know and understand that just because you remove a tissue, the thyroid, the breast, the prostate, you remove it, it does not mean that you still will not get cancer. It's important to make that distinction because removing tissue does not remove your liability. It does not remove your risk. Okay, so really important. I'm not telling you what to do, what decisions to make, or that you made a bad decision. I'm just telling you that if you have the environment for cancer to grow and you remove a tissue, it'll just grow somewhere else. So I think that's really important to make that distinction. And when this actress did this, it prompted a lot of other women to do the same thing. Now, I do have a very dear friend who did do the very same thing. I do believe she had a BRCA or BRCA, whatever you want to refer to it, or BRCA 1 or 2, gene increased risk, and at her doctor's recommendation had her breast removed. And I will tell you that she got another form of cancer about a year later, okay? Now, I'm bringing that up not to, again, change how you think about cancer. I'm not bringing that up to tell you that you possibly made a bad decision. I'm bringing that up because it's important to know that, okay? To know that that's a possible outcome, all right? And the reason, again, why I'm bringing that up is because, again, genes are like light switches. They're not to blame. They're not to call good or bad genes. They're either turned on or turned off, and you always want the genes that express life to be turned on and the genes that express death to be turned off, okay? Now, as it relates to tumor suppressor genes, you will be pretty fascinated to know that BRCA or BRCA, I call it BRCA, is BRCA1 and BRCA2, okay? These are genes that are often associated with increased risk for breast cancer. But let me explain really what that means. Because although these genes have been associated with increased risk for breast cancer, it's important to know that these are actually tumor suppressor genes. They actually suppress tumor growth, okay? Now, what happens is what makes them actually cancer causing is the fact that they become mutated. Okay, so when these genes become mutated, then they become cancer causing. Okay, now the reason why that's so important is this, because the genes in their original state actually cause you to thrive, are actually cancer fighting. These very same genes that have been associated with increased risk of breast cancer. But when they become mutated, they become what are called proto-oncogenes. And when they're in this state, this is when they then can cause the tissue to become cancerous. Okay, this is not only BRCA1, BRCA2, but it's also HER2 as well too, which is a third gene that is associated with a higher risk for cancer as well too. So it's really important to know and understand that you got to know this full picture. And the reason why it's so important to know this full picture is because, again, you have to think about what we look like in our healthy state. In our healthy state, these genes are actually healthy for us. It's only when they become mutated, and they become mutated not randomly. Like, people are under the impression that it's a very random process, okay? When you look at the percentage, and you should do this research for yourself, look up the percentage of cancers that are caused by genes, okay, or that are derived from genes. It is only 5 to 10%, okay? This is only about 5 to 10%, and I'm being very generous with the 10%. Generally speaking, it's only around 5%, okay? And guess what? Breast cancer isn't one of those. Now, can it be an increased risk? Let's say, for instance, I'll give you a for instance where it could be right. Let's say your mother had breast cancer, okay? Or your father had the genes, BRCA1 and BRCA2. And then these genes became mutated. And then when you were born with these mutated genes, then now you have an increased risk. Okay, but again, you got to remember, genes are like light switches. They can be turned on and turned off. That's the really important thing that I want you to learn from this. If you don't learn anything from this, genes are not to blame. They're like light switches. You know, if I go over to that light switch and hit the bottom button and the lights go off, it's not the button's fault that caused the lights to go off. It's either two things. It's either an individual who came and hit the light switch and turned it on or off, or it's the fact that the bulb went out. But it has nothing to do with the light switch. Okay, that's the best approach to look at genes and breast cancer. Okay, so simply the best approach that I give people is think to yourself, what am my lifestyle? Because again, your lifestyle is all you can control. Your environmental factors are all you can control. Your behavior is all you can control. You know, and by controlling that, you can control your genes in many cases by turning them on and off. Okay, but again, most cancers are not derived from the genes. Like automatically you get this cancer because you have this gene. That's only about 5% of cancers. Okay, again, breast cancer isn't one of those. So it's all about what happened to turn that switch on. And the switch on meaning the oncogenes, the genes that cause cancer. Because again, the tumor suppressor genes are the one that's keeping or stomping cancer out on a daily basis. You don't even know you get cancer. Okay, really important. The other thing that I want to bring up that is really important is the mutation, which comes from often the DNA damage. And then we'll talk about how do we go about repairing our DNA. It's important to know that our lifestyles today are essentially in alignment with our DNA becoming damaged on a daily basis. When you think about cameras, phones, computers, televisions, wireless, the list goes on and on. We're constantly being exposed to EMF, okay? The best way to look at it is that 20 years ago, you know, like 20 years ago, it wasn't common to have a cell phone. Everybody didn't have a cell phone, you know, in 2000. You know, you go back to 1998, 99, again, 25 years ago. Not everybody had a cell phone. Most people did not have a cell phone. So this is a 25-year experiment with cell phones and Wi-Fi and, you know, televisions that run off Wi-Fi and so forth and so forth. It's important to know and understand that it takes years, because our bodies are so resilient, to understand the impact of something on our overall health. And I do believe that we will eventually discover that EMF that comes from cell phones, televisions, computers, all sorts of electronic devices is impacting our health on a daily basis and is damaging our DNA. Okay, so I think that's really important. So that's one way that our DNA can get damaged. Processed foods. Processed foods are a relatively new invention. And when I say new invention, processed foods didn't come in existence until during World War II, okay? And then that technology was handed over to the food industry, and that didn't spill its way onto the scene in the way that we know it today until like the 1980s and 90s. And then it eventually became ubiquitous in the 2000s, meaning 80% of the food in the supermarket is processed food. But you go back prior to World War II, there's very little processed food, okay? Very little processed food. So it's really important to understand that that in and of itself is an experiment as well too. And I haven't even mentioned things like the pesticides and herbicides and insecticides that these foods are sprayed with. I haven't mentioned the fact that there's genetically modified foods in the all over in the food system, and especially in these processed foods. I haven't even mentioned those yet. Clone this, clone that. So processed foods are actually damaging our DNA as well too. Chlorine. Not just in the swimming pools that we swim in, because they're virtually in every swimming pool. I had to, you know, I was wanting to go swim and looking for a pool without chlorine. It was one in the entire city that was a salt pool instead of a chlorine pool. Okay, and it's not just the pools, but chlorine is actually in our tap water as well too. Okay, what's the impact of that? Even if you don't drink tap water, okay, you bathe in it, and guess what? This skin absorbs whatever you put on it. The lotion, you know, the perfume, the cologne, the water, it definitely absorbs it. So whatever's in the water is going in us. And so chlorine damages DNA as well too. Stress. We experience stress that our ancestors never experienced, okay? Our ancestors never, like, had to worry about a post on social media affecting their day. I know everybody has seen a post that made them mad or something like that, or some troll on social media. That was something like we never, like, as people would experience. So we're experiencing stress in ways that we never experienced stress as human beings, okay? Before, it was a true stress, like a shortage of food, being attacked by a bear. But now we're experiencing stress that isn't even true stress, and it's the kind of stress that lives with us throughout the day. Traffic. You know, you get out of traffic and go to work, you still stressed out. And then you got to get right back in it to go home, and by the time you get home, stressed out until you go to sleep. Then you go to sleep with that stress, and now you have unsettling sleep. So it's important to know that stress in and of itself can actually cause DNA damage as well too, because you're not getting a good night's sleep, okay? Endocrine disruptors, not only in pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, but in plastics. Most of the food and things that we buy today are packaged in plastic, okay? And a huge number of plastic particles are in the food that we eat that we don't know about. And a lot of them have endocrine disruptors, and these endocrine disruptors damage DNA as well too, all right? Other things like environmental toxins, okay? Toxins in the environments that we don't know about. I've talked about in previous videos, some of these cement plants that burn off coal, and that coal gets into the air, and there's heavy metals and all type of other toxins in the air as well too. You know, so there's toxins virtually everywhere, environmental toxins. There's also radiation, not only from our phones and our computers, but whenever you get on a plane, radiation, you know, checkups, radiation. Okay, we're constantly being exposed, going through the airport, radiation. Okay, again, and being exposed to things that damage our DNA in ways that our ancestors never got exposed to. Free radicals, okay, that are coming from our food, that are coming from the environment, are also destroying our DNA as well. So what are some ways we can repair our DNA? Because that is the first sort of punch in the stomach that begins cancer, is the damage of the DNA. So what are some things we could do to not only repair our DNA, but to prevent it from being damaged? Okay, one of the key things that you can do is eat a diet that is loaded with antioxidants and phytonutrients. Antioxidants fight oxidation. Oxidation is what leads to free radicals, and free radicals is what damages DNA and cells. Okay, so you got to eat a diet that is loaded with antioxidants. That's why on a daily basis, I'm constantly consuming things like this soursop, you know, on a constant basis. I'm eating things like this all the time, not just because I love it, because I actually do, but I'm eating this to make sure that I'm putting things in my body that are not only nourishing me, that are not only, you know, tickling my taste buds, but also that are fighting off disease and preventing disease as well too. All right, so it's hugely important. You got to eat a diet high in antioxidants, and guess what? Fruits are some of the best things that are loaded with antioxidants. So if you're not eating enough raw, you know, untampered, and when I say untampered, no pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, if you're not eating a lot of those, then you're not going to have a lot of antioxidants in your diet. And one of those antioxidants being vitamin C, okay? Vitamin C is important because it neutralizes free radicals. Those same free radicals that are damaging your DNA, vitamin C and vitamin E neutralize them, okay? Again, you're going to get this from plants. You're not going to get these from meat, dairy, processed foods. They're not there. Okay, so this is why I'm always constantly telling people, this is why it has to be the foundation of your diet, okay? Also, vitamin D. And especially in the African-American population, 76% of us are deficient in vitamin D. But even the vast majority of the population is just vitamin D deficient, but especially darker individuals. All right, and why is vitamin D important when it comes to cancer? Because it stabilizes the DNA structure. When it becomes unstabilized, that's when you open yourself up to mutation and damage of the DNA. Okay, so whenever you don't have vitamin D isn't just for strong bones. It's for your immune systems, for DNA protection as well too. All right, so hugely important. Minerals like magnesium and zinc, especially zinc. And the reason why is because zinc is key in a process called apoptosis. Apoptosis is like programmed cellular death. So when a cell gets too old, it just needs to die. Okay, if it doesn't die, what happens is the DNA can become, damaged. Just because this cell is now it's like an old car. Okay, over time it just becomes more and more worn out. And at some point, you need to get rid of the car. Well, it's the same thing with cells. We need to get rid of these old cells so we can replace them with new cells. And guess what? When you have enough zinc in your diet, it tells your body when to do that. And that way, your body isn't accumulating all these old cells inside of it, okay? It helps with cellular proliferation, which is actually needed for cancer to grow, like this. Okay, it also protects against free radicals, and it also sort of helps with the DNA repair processes or pathways as well too. So zinc is a game changer, and a lot of people don't get enough zinc in their diet as well too. Fasting, is another way that we can actually repair our DNA as well too. Because fasting to a certain level, you can get to a phase that is called autophagy. And autophagy does cellular cleaning, okay, as well too, to help repair not only the cell, but the DNA of the cell as well too. So fasting is very key as well too. Sauna, being in the sauna, okay, to help cleanse out the toxins in the body, but also detoxing to remove waste from the body as well too. Your body cannot heal itself if it's laden with toxins. I always tell people, especially when it comes to my detox, it's not that my detox heals you. What heals you is your body. But what's in the way of your body actually healing itself are the toxins. Okay? Because whenever those elimination pathways become saturated, whenever those detoxification organs start to reduce in their efficiency and proficiency at not only removing toxins, but doing other major functions as well too, your body cannot heal itself. Okay, so that's why detoxing plays a major role as well too. And then the last thing I'll say is weight loss. Weight loss is very important because the more adipose tissue or fat tissue you have on your body, it creates oxidative stress. Remember I was telling you earlier, you need antioxidants. Well, the more fat you have on your body, it creates more and more oxidative stress. And guess what? The more and more oxidative stress you have, the more free radicals you create, the more DNA damage. This is why individuals who are overweight or obese are more likely to get cancer. They have a higher risk for getting cancer. So those are the ways that you can repair your DNA and thus repair your genes to a point where you turn on the right genes and turn off the wrong genes. Okay? Hope you have enjoyed this. Until the next time, peace and blessings and Godspeed.